want to introduce you to someone who is near and dear to both of us, a gentleman by the name of Patrick McMurray, who started in restaurants when he was about 16, but he continued in his education and academics, as well as his curiosity about cuisines of the world. And with a degree in kinesiology, he shucked his way into our hearts. And eventually, I think it was in 2002, in Ireland, he became the world champion oyster opener, the only Canadian to win the most illustrious shucking contest in over 60 years at that point. He also holds 3 Guinness Book World Records for shucking oysters, 39 in 1 minute. 39 oysters he shucked in 1 minute. He was part of Team Canada. They shucked 8,840 oysters in 1 hour. And I think that's pretty extraordinary. He also is an inventor. He invented the world famous pistol grip oyster knife and a new shucking technique. And I think you have one with you. Do you?
Yes, I do.
Let me see that. Oh, okay. And so he also is an author. He wrote The Oyster Companion in 2018, which is everything you need to know, but might have been afraid to ask about oysters. He's a restaurateur. He's a teacher. He's also an oyster sommelier. I don't even know what that means, so I want to ask him about that. But he is here with us right now, Patrick McMurray.
All right, let's go.
Okay.
Nice.
All right, sir, you want to take this outside? Let's go. How are you? It's so good to see you again, Miss Sara and Adam. It's great seeing you. Thank you very much for having me here.
Good seeing you too. But tell me, what is an oyster sommelier?
It's such an interesting story. Thank you for that. There's been a lot of people using it in the past number of years as a concept. How much do you know about oysters, or how do you help describe this? Who is the person in charge that can talk about this, and what would their title be? In the world of beer, it's a cicerone. Mm-hmm. Of course, in wine, it is a wine terminology to use the word sommelier. And we wanted to create something that showcases the level of knowledge that's required to create a global knowledge about oysters, because oysters are around everywhere, wherever ocean touches land. Most people would know just 1 or 2 different types. We have 5 different species in North America. With the Maritimes Canada alone, you've probably got over 100 to 120 different brands within one species of oyster. And then you've got the West Coast, which has got 30 or 40 different brands or more. And and then you go through the States. So if you gather that knowledge and you try to explain this to people, a long time ago, and it was actually sort of suggested to me by a client once. This is back at the beginning of Starfish, and they asked the difference. What's the difference between like an East Coast oyster and a West Coast oyster? And I said, well, an East Coast oyster, generally speaking, is salty sweet. And a West Coast oyster comes off with ocean sea salt, sweet cream, melon, and cucumber. And they're like, it sounds like you're talking about like a sommelier. You're talking about wine. I go, well, if you take all the sauce, all the lemon off, take the oyster, slide it in, 2-bite chew, and then aerate like a sommelier tells you to. And that's not because they're wine people doing that. It's because that's how your olfactory system works with your palate. And it's a physiological thing. To understand that, that's how you get to know the flavor of any food. And it really works well with oyster as well. So once I started telling them that, they got this confusion. Then they tried it, and they're like, but that's exactly what it's in. So in the long answer to this is that there's a sommelier who understands. An oyster sommelier would be someone who understands the oyster menu at a restaurant or a bar or hotel, help clients and customers to understand what oysters to choose from what they like, what to pair them with, whether it's wine, beer, whiskey per se, or other spirits or cocktails. Then they can help run a program. So we're developing, we as this group I've created with my partner Julie, Oyster Master Guild, to help educate and teach people, train them up to the level of a sommelier, of that level of knowledge, because this is an apprenticed thing. Oysters and oyster shucking, we learn to this point, we learn from those people who have taught us wherever you start working. And if you work in a place where they actually like oysters, you're going to get better than if you work in a place like, you got to shuck oysters. You're shucking oysters. So it depends on the restaurant that you're at. So we've decided to work this way and sort of help and teach people about the world of oyster.
I was at the Brock Environmental Center in Virginia Beach. Oh, what is this book?
That's my original. Consider the Oysters the OG. That's the first rendition from 2006, and then we updated in 2018 with this one.
And it's beautiful.
Thank you.
The photographs are wonderful.
I did most of the pictures in that one. As you travel around and you pick up the pictures, thank you very much. So I threw those into the publisher as well.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So, I was at the Brock Environmental Center in, I think it was in Virginia Beach, and there was this whole education about oysters because, as you know, there's the Virginia Oyster Trail. And what I became aware of then was how important they are to the environment, that, you know, each oyster acts like a filter. And so kind of reclaiming the Chesapeake Bay and that kind of rugged coastline, it's been really helpful to replenish the ecosystem by introducing more oysters, because they have a keystone role.
Exactly.
Enable all these aquatic sanctuaries along their reefs.
Being a keystone species, that's what helps build the environment. If you put an oyster farm in, the oyster is a filter feeder. Now, consumers worry about that. It's not like they're a furnace filter and they filter stop everything. They're selective of what they want to eat. Oysters would like to eat phytoplankton and zooplankton. So that's just the microscopic organisms that are around. And that's what they would normally like to eat. And once they clear that out of the system, then there's more light that gets down to the substrate and more plant life can grow. And then animals and fish and everything all come in as well and create that wonderful little environment. They also, because of the hard shell on them, they sequester carbon out of the ocean, out of the atmosphere, into the ocean, out of the ocean, into the shell to create and build that shell, and it becomes a sink, carbon sink. So when you open up your oyster and you keep it, you can compost it here in Ontario or Toronto, or if you're landlocked, you can do stuff there. On the coastline, they generally season it for a year and then put it back into the ocean to help rebuild that substrate, so that it becomes that ocean circle, you know, when it comes down to it.
Well, you're someone, you're involved in, I don't remember the name of the agency. It's Seacourt?
Oh, Seacourt is a wholesaler in Toronto. Yep, yeah. I'm involved with them, yeah.
Well, like in consulting, like what time, which season is appropriate for certain oysters? Because I think, and that's so important, because people don't think of seafood in terms of season as much as they should.
They'll wonder. Sometimes they'll say, I had an oyster and it tastes great. 6 months later, it tastes different. Yeah. And it's like, well, it's not a sandwich. You're not going to make it taste the same all the way along. You know, these oysters here that I have, we're showcasing a lot of East Coast oysters. These ones are what we call a winter oyster right now. They've endured the winter of the maritime Canada. They're under 6 feet of ice. So anywhere from December until March, if you get good Canadian maritime oysters, generally speaking, most of the growers have cut through the ice and hauled it up and then bring it to the distribution center, pack it up, and away you go. Well, with the ice, that freezes off a lot of the fresh water, and it sort of concentrates the salt water. So these ones have a very deep, big, bold, briny flavor. Some of them out of Cascapec Bay have got a sort of very neat earthiness to it, very mushroom and umami. Others are steely clean versus sweet, sugar sweet in the finish of it. So they all change, and it will change through the seasons. The same oyster will change based on what's happening, because we don't always have ice. So the ice goes, you got the spring, then you got a summer, then you got a fall, then you got a winter. You got 4 different seasons on oysters. Back in the pandemic, I was actually, the silver lining. I had barstool oysters in from Prince Edward Island and said, just ship me them all the time. And I was able over a year to take pictures of them throughout their change. And I go, great, this is my thing that I can do and showcase this.
Is the harvest of oysters in PEI is that the way it's done there? Is that the way it's done everywhere, or do different regions, different countries have a different process for how they harvest?
Great question. Many different ways of harvesting oysters and growing oysters. Really, it originated in ancient China, one of the earliest forms of farming, and then it developed into Roman era. The Romans really kind of developed the way that we kind of do it now, where they've got bags and floats, and then they transfer to different stations. The Europeans learned about that. Then that knowledge also came over here, where First Nations were gardening for tens of thousands of years, where they would collect oysters and then put them in an area where it's easier to get to, and then they could harvest them up. So each region will do something different at contemporary oystering. Tide tumbling, whether you're doing sort of more of a intensive or style of farming, or extensive style of farming, where you're going to allow Mother Nature to do more of the work, and you're raking them up, you're placing the oysters. We have this sort of a wild fishery in Prince Edward Island, where you can take spring harvest in public beds and move them to your bed to finish for the season. And then you can rake them up and bring them. They're all going to be grown on bottom, as most oysters will do that. But then we've also got grape farming. If you want to get an oyster to look like this each and every time, you have to farm that. And it's unlike fish farming. We do not feed the oysters. That's, again, Mother Nature with the phytoplankton. The farmer uses different techniques to shape the shells. And if it's a well-shaped shell, well farmed, it'll be easier to open. So if it's easier to open, then more people will enjoy it. Hopefully.
Okay.
I
Well,
was in
Yeah.
British Columbia, and a man took us out on a boat. The water was clear as if it was a swimming pool. And at the bottom were millions and millions of little oysters.
Yeah.
And this was his waters, and he was growing the oysters. And the kind of oysters they were baking oysters. You put them on a barbecue, and they
Sure.
opened them. They looked like rocks. You know, you didn't, if you saw a couple of them just lying on the garden or something, yeah, you wouldn't think that they were the oysters that we know.
is
Um,
is that a
but
Japanese thing?
he was like John Wayne.
Oh, okay.
He
Because
was
I've
really a character.
because
There-
I've experienced that in Japan, where they
Baking
don't-
oysters?
yes, where they don't harvest them as often or as quickly as we do here. So they let them grow a lot longer and larger, and then they barbecue them or
Yeah.
they smoke them.
Yeah. If you want to cook an oyster, you need something a little bit bigger that holds up to the heat. It doesn't shrink as much.
Oh, okay.
Our East Coast oysters are great on the half shell, but little cocktails are just too small. They'll just shrivel right up. The West Coast, as you saw, Sarah, a lot of times they'll have beach oysters or big honkers. I love the way they call them baking oysters. And just like a baking potato, nice large thing.
Mhm.
And when you open it up, you've got a lot of meat, and you can put sauce or whatever you want onto it, and it works really well.
The ones I like best in Canada are the Malpecs, and
Yes.
in the U.S.,
Rappahannock.
Rappahannock's out of Virginia.
Oh,
I love
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah. Delish.
Rappahannock's are my favorite. But when I was in Japan, do you remember years ago I went and I wrote about Mikimoto pearls, Mom?
Yes.
And so there are these women called ama divers, and some of them are in their 80s. They swim out to the bay, and they each have a bucket, and they dive down, they collect the seafood, put them back in the bucket, and swim back. And so we would have all different kinds of seafood, but they're now somehow, at least from a tourism perspective, affiliated with Mikimoto pearls. And I just became so interested in those oysters at the time. So I got to stay with someone who, he had his, would you call it a hatchery?
You would. It would be
Yeah.
hatchery grows the little baby ones. So is that where you're thinking about
Well,
it, or is
so
this the
in
pearls?
No, for the oysters. So in the bay, he had all these skids,
Yep.
and everything was so clean. Like he and his family used toothbrushes to
Yep.
everything immaculate. And the oysters were unbelievable.
Super. Yeah, that'd be an oyster farm.
Yeah, Oyster Farm,
Yep.
of course. Yeah.
I was at Canoe, the restaurant, years
Yes.
ago. I had just come back from Japan, and I met two of my girlfriends. I had brought them gifts, and we ordered oysters. And in my oyster at Canoe in Toronto, there were 3 little pearls,
Wow.
and I still have them.
That's a good number. I have it's rare that you find 3. You can find one once in a while. Best I've found is 33 in one out of New York. But that was because I know Canoe and I know their list. That's probably coming out of Prince Edward Island, and I would hazard a guess that was a Caskenpeck Bay oyster. They, for some reason, out of Prince Edward Island, Caskenpeck Bay oysters, you'll find pearls more often than not. And I don't know why it is. And I told the growers that. I'm like, as if I'm watching Instagram and all that type of stuff, I can see people popping pearls out of their oysters. It's kind of interesting because you never know if there's one in there.
Well, I felt it.
Yeah.
I thought it was something that came from my tooth.
Yep.
And then there were 3 of them. I was so excited. I told the waiter, and he didn't believe me. He said, "Oh, come on."
He's probably good that he didn't charge you for the pearls. That's $9,000.
Yeah. So we're talking about Canadian oysters. Are there certain that we know about the Malpec oysters? Are there certain that you're promoting or that more people should be aware of in terms of like all the? I'm sure there's a quite a vast number of Canadian oysters, but are there a few that we should be looking out for?
There's a myriad of oysters that you can get, and some of the rare and wonderful ones that you don't normally see. And it depends on the palate of the what region you're at. In Toronto, they're predominantly an East Coast palated city. Montreal is a little bit more European in its thoughts, so they can get a little bit more West Coast and then maritime as well. British Columbia oysters, absolutely love them. Effingham Bay oyster is as far west as you can get in Canada. It's off the Pacific coast side of Vancouver Island. So that is a brilliant oyster that you should look into or look for, which are fantastic. And you can get them in small, petite sizes. They don't have all oysters don't always come into the large size. They can get that way, but a lot of times they'll bring them out in the smaller cocktail size. I've had Max in Fenny Bay. Fenny Bay has something called the Sunseeker. The Sunseeker oyster is a tide-tumbled oyster, which means that the tide comes and goes and really allows it to tumble a lot. The stress on that shell causes the cap to be as cupped as the bottom, and you get this lovely little pillow of oceany goodness within the shell that just makes my eyes water. So that's something to find as well.
Where is Fanny Bay from?
Fanny Bay, Comox. They're from the Comox region of British Columbia, so they're the inside. They're on the Sunshine Coast type of thing is where they come from, and they have a secret code. They won't tell me.
All right.
I'm going to tell them that.
In Toronto seem to get their oysters from the East Coast. Like,
mostly
was it Raspberry Point or Strawberry
Raspberry Point is a brilliant grower out of Prince Edward Island for sure. We have ones that I was showcasing today. Everyone was out of their mind for Barachois oysters from Rustico, and the salt on it was like a firecracker. East Cape is a great grower off East Coast. And you go into Nova Scotia, these are the areas that you don't normally hear about. You got to find them. Eel Lake is a wonderful oyster. Sober Island and Shandaff. Shandaff grows a beautiful oyster up near on the northern side of it. Great stuff. And then, of course, New Brunswick has got a lovely stuff. All the way up at the tippy top, Caracat oysters. And right down into, of course, the Beausoleils. I've got a lovely little Beausoleil right here with a large size to it. These guys have been growing, aquaculturing. Look at the shape of the top of the shell to the bottom. It's nice and round. So Beausoleils and French Kiss are wonderful. Newfoundland. Thank you, global warming. Newfoundland has oysters now. It's something, since you've been coming to Starfish, I've been like, where's the Newfoundland oysters? And it was something I was chasing for years. And then all of a sudden, I followed the right people, listened to what they were saying. And now, because of the global warming, the benefit is that they can grow oysters on a year-round basis. Mirachine Bay oysters coming out of Newfoundland, which is a good little one to look for as well.
I want to ask you about the contests.
Contest, sure.
What happens? Like, do a whole lot of people stand in front of a table with bags of oysters?
Yes. As my wife says, it's like watching paint dry. So to her, it's a little, because she's been doing it now, watching for like hundreds of years. A contest is basically it comes from restaurant life. Customers want their oysters quick, but they also want them clean. So we got pushed into this world of restaurant style competition because there's a gallon shucking as well. So if you get oysters in a gallon or shucked, those shuckers are crazy. Like, I don't even get what they do. It's bonkers. But what we have to do is we have to open up an oyster. We have to take the two shells apart, sever the top part, get that shell gone, cut the bottom so it's loose, ready to go. And then a panel of judges will look at what I've done to that oyster. Because as you know, sharp knife into the hard shell, there's a very soft body of meat on the inside. It's very easy to nick, to cut, to throw in grit, and to do other things with it. So there's penalty points added to the time it takes for you to open the set number of oysters.
How did you feel
12.
the first time? The first time that you
First
won?
time in competition. This is back when I worked at Rodney's Oyster House back at the 209 Island, the OG. I've been there for 2 weeks. They go, and this is in August. They say, Patty, there's going to be a contest. You're going in this weekend. I go, I haven't even washed oysters. Like, I haven't even shucked not one. They go, well, you're going in because everybody does it. I'm like, all right. So I go and I do it. I came in 13th out of 14. One person disqualified. So I come in 13 or 14, and the winner got a chance to go to PEI. So I go, wait a minute. So if you do good at this shucking thing, you can go to PEI. Yep. And if you do the good there, you can go to Ireland. I'm like, why Ireland? Well, that's where the World Championships is. I'm like, what? For doing this? I'm like, yeah. And that's sort of where I learned about it. But we all got very good at doing what we did because of the speed that we had to shuck oysters. You couldn't work a Friday night at Rodney's Oyster House until you graduated Mondays. Right, you can work the slower days and you graduate your way up until you get your technique so that you can come in and do much better. So that's sort of where contests come from, and it's something that a lot of people love to do. We're hosting one here tomorrow.
Oh,
Where is here?
Well, I'm at Boston right now, and we're in it's the North America's Seafood Show Expo. So they have me come in and I host and MC and run the contest.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this. You mentioned global warming, but global warming is affecting the salinity in the waters around the world. So how is that? You mentioned that now there's oysters in Newfoundland, but what about in other places like in warmer waters?
So the is I don't know if you watched the weather the past 2 years. There's been cook-offs. There's been British Columbia and down through Washington and Oregon. There was a cook-off last year, and it's not in a good way. There were 120 degrees, 110 degrees. When the tide went out, everything got cooked. And down in the Gulf of Mexico, it's well over 100 every so often, and it does multiple different things. Bacteria count goes through the roof. It's too hot for the oysters, so the oysters do a die-off, and you lose a lot of product in that time frame. And let's say, Acme Oyster Bar in Louisiana, New Orleans, which is a classic that you should go and visit. Well, they can't get their local oysters. They couldn't get, so they're getting cold water oysters. So the good thing about that is the Canadian oysters are well known to be in cold water, so they can get them to the areas that need them in the times. But it's that you will get temperatures that are too hot for oystering. They can survive through it, but you lose your stock is what you're looking for in the stock and the volume of oysters that you're going to sell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that did happen.
This is the water clarity and the temperature.
Yep.
All that's being affected.
Yep.
So we have these diploids are the filters, but at the same time, they're dying off because of the temperature and what they're having to filter.
Yeah, what would happen with the temperature is that they'd have a die-off, but then there's bacteria count that might go too high for human consumption. And there's other things called like red tide, which is a type of algae bloom that blooms up again in the warmer waters that the oysters can live through, but humans cannot consume. So therefore, there's times of years in the warmer body areas where you can't get oysters because they're not allowed to harvest. And you'll see that on Weather Network, even your red tide bloom this season, and then no oysters being harvested from this region. So we buy as a buyer, we just buy from regions that are open. And it's not to be, you don't have to be scared about it. Professional oyster groups know about this stuff and only buy in certain times. And more or less, if you're an oyster grower, you're not allowed to harvest. They test the water. The government tests the water first, and then they test the oysters before they ship out. So as a consumer, I would not be worried about these things. It's just something to know that why can't I get my favorite oyster right now? It's like, well, let's look at the seasonality of what's going on.
It is a fascinating subject, that's for sure.
So you're in Boston. Are you seeing anyone from Legal Seafoods?
There's one across the street from you right there, and they're wandering the trade show. So I'm doing a bunch of different things. I don't necessarily get a chance to go out to Legal, but I've been to a couple of them before, and we chat every so often over LinkedIn, with some people there.
Well, we are out of time. There's so much more we could talk about, but I really appreciate your time. I hope you have a wonderful time in Boston.
Thank you very much. Yes, you too. You too. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Anytime.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Thanks, Sarah. Bye. Thanks, Adam.